Okay, so back to Locke. The next theme from our reading is in both sections of the text. So the section which is in the 200 pages and this other later section that's in the 400 pages, they both cover this ground that's very important next. Okay, so remember what we've gone over so far. In the state of nature, which is defined as anytime you're in a you have the status of not being under a government, there's still some rules and laws that apply. Okay, so if you don't have a government around, there's still basic human decency, you might say. More specifically, it's literally human rights still apply. Okay. However, what we want to know is, okay, now that I am, or in fact I am in a government, I live under a government, I want to be able to check if it's a good or a bad government. So the test or the criteria for how you check if a government is good or bad is you check to see if it's violating any of your rights. So if it violates any of your rights, it's a bad government. And the founding fathers were with Locke on this point, that if you live under a bad government, defined as a government that violates your rights, this is important, so pay attention. If you live under a bad government, that is, a government which violates your rights, you can treat that government just like a thief in the state of nature. What did we just end with in the other recording? That you can, if you're pushed to it, someone violates your rights in the state of nature, it doesn't really matter which of the rights that Locke laid out, any of those rights violated, Locke says, can be punished with death. Remember, the thief does not have to threaten your life. They just have to violate one of your rights, either your right to property, your right to freedom, your right to your own life, or your political equality. Those basic rights that Locke lays out in the very beginning of our assigned reading. Now remember, nobody in the state of nature, capital N nobody, has rights over you. That's what political equality means, right? Is other people may have rights, but they're going to have reciprocal or identical rights to the rights that you have. Like I said, no one's born a king with some rights additional to the ones you have. So a government isn't going to be the kind of thing that has more rights than you either. In fact, strictly speaking, the government doesn't have rights because rights are human rights. So the government does not have the authority, it is not legitimate for it to violate your rights under any circumstances. Think about it. If a person who actually has their own rights can't violate your rights, and you must punish them if they do, so much more so a government, which is not actually people really, but it's sort of institutions and structures, where would they get the power to violate your rights? You know, if your sister can't steal your stuff without deservedly getting punishment, if your brother can't steal your stuff without getting deservedly punished, why would this abstract thing based out of Washington, D.C. have powers to harm you? So, that's how we judge individual governments, is we ask if they're violating our rights or not. Now remember, in the state of nature, or when you have the status of just natural human rights and no laws yet, you're allowed to do whatever you want except mess with other people's rights. So you can use your freedom so long as you don't mess with somebody else's freedom. You can enact your rights so long as that doesn't block or take away a right of somebody else, etc., etc. We're all one big happy family. Now what we're going to see is that when you move out of the state of nature into what Locke calls civil society, which just means when you have a functioning government, if you compare the state of nature to civil society, you will quickly notice that you have fewer rights under the United States Constitution or weaker rights, we might say, more limited rights, than you did living in the state of nature. In the state of nature, you can drive 80, 90 miles an hour on the freeway as long as you're not putting others at risk. You can open a business in the state of nature without getting a permit, right? The list goes on and on. Now, a lot of students jump in right here and go, well, according to Locke, right or wrong, but according to Locke, we live under a tyranny. Look at all this limitation of freedom. Look at all this political inequality because senators get to vote. So on federal legislation, Congress gets to vote. Police officers can have and use guns in ways that you can't. They literally have the right to do that, and you don't. The president gets to fly on Air Force One whenever they want. You can't really fly on it, certainly not whenever you want. So a lot of students at this point will say, something's weird about Locke, because he seems to say that our government even is a gross tyranny. Let's not even get into the individual laws that you might not like, but basic stuff like that the military can do certain things, and if you're not in the military, you can't. Here's the thing, though. Remember what Locke said about consent. Nobody is born naturally having more or less rights than anybody else. However, think about how a contract which you consent to works. I agree when I contract with you that I will do certain things for you that I don't have to do. That is, you don't have the right to my work, for instance. And you will do certain things for me that you don't have to do. Like you'll give me your money. But since we both consented or freely chose to engage in that contract, it's totally legitimate with an L. It's good. Right? Like if you have a friend who says, can you give me a ride to the airport? If they force you to do that, that's literally kidnapping. When you make a person go somewhere they don't want to go, it's kidnapping. But if you ask them, would you please take me to the airport? And they say, sure. Will you buy me lunch before we go? Sure. Then it's consent or consensual. Nobody's rights are violated because each person chose to do X, Y, Z regarding the other person. So let's add all these things up. You don't basically have to do anything in the state of nature. You just have to not violate other people's rights. You don't have to give rides. You don't have to show your ID when someone asks you. None of that stuff. But what civil society is when you get together with a bunch of other people and you, for whatever reason, decide that you would all like together to change who has which rights. Maybe you want to say, all of us used to be able to go as fast as we wanted on the roads. Now let's say that none of us can go over 65. Okay, that would be a limitation of rights. As long as you all agree to it, basically. Then it's, you know what I mean? It's not a violation of your freedom because you freely chose to limit your own right with other people. Now here's where it gets a little more complicated. You could also, if you wanted, say, hey, I'm willing to give up a certain right of mine. Not equally with everyone else, but I want to give up the right, say, to punish. I'm going to let Jane and Joe be the only two people in our society who punish. And everyone else in the society agrees. Okay, so Bobby says that's good. Betty says that's good. Let's just keep it at 5 people. You, Bobby, Betty, and Jane and Joe, I think I said, all decide you'd rather just Jane and Joe were the cops. Now you say, since y'all are the cops, since you two are the cops, you can go into people's houses as long as you have a warrant, say. Okay, I gave up my right. I can't go into someone's house with or without a warrant. That would be trespassing because I'm a civilian or whatever you want to call it. Now that's acceptable. You can give people, we don't want to use that language. You can allow Jane and Joe in this example to do things that you don't allow to the rest of society. Now, this is why I don't want to say you give them extra rights. That's what I almost said. Because technically you have all the rights you could possibly have in the state of nature. You can't really magnify those rights. And you can't, even if you think you consent to it, you can't agree to allow the government to violate your rights. So you couldn't say Jane and Joe are cops so they can shoot to death the president whenever they feel like it, or they can shoot to death senators or whoever, bowling coaches, whatever, whenever they want. No reason, no crime. You'd be like, wait a second. Extrajudicial killings, that's just a rights violation. Coming into someone's house with a warrant signed by a judge, that seems to be, maybe something you don't want, but as long as they let you know, etc., the United States seems to think it's not a violation of your rights. Okay? So this is when we introduce two things simultaneously. What we call civil society, which is government basically, when you establish through consensual contracts a government with other people, as long as it's free, and as long as what you agree to doesn't violate anybody's rights, it just changes who has them, but it doesn't violate anybody's rights, then you've set up civil society or government. That's the first thing. The second thing that's introduced is political inequality, a new lack of political equality. Now, some people, they're called anarchists, will here say, I in no way want to ever give up any of my rights to someone else. I don't want to empower some people, say the police or the military, to retain rights that I've given up. Okay, that's a political position. We won't go into it here because it's definitely not Locke. Okay, but for the rest of us who choose to live in a civil society, to live under a government, we're allowed to do that, where we give basically judges the right to apply the law fairly. We give police and the military the right to use violence to protect us, including against criminals in our midst. And we give legislatures the rights to choose, we allow them to keep the right of deciding what's good or bad, what's legal and illegal in our society. Now, you've given up all three of those rights. Let me repeat them again because they're important. There's three basic branches of government for Locke, and in America too. Okay, it's judges. I'll give you more detail on this in a moment. It's judges. It's police, military, and jail wardens, all as one group. Police, military, and jail wardens, all as one group. Let's see, I already said judges, police, and the legislature. That's, you know what that is, that's Congress. Now the thing is, for each one of these, you let some other people, Congress, cops, judges, you let them keep some of their rights that we all had in the state of nature. The right to decide when rights have been violated, that's the judges. The right to punish, which we spent so much time talking about, that's the police, the wardens, and the military. Right? And the right to decide what's an acceptable use of freedom and what's not an acceptable use of freedom. So that explains the government at one level. But you should be asking yourself here, why on God's green earth would I ever choose to limit some of my own rights? Why on earth would I do that? And remember, if Locke says if you have any reason to do that, you don't have to justify yourself, but if you feel like doing that, and other people in the society that you're trying to form also agree to do that, basically if all the states ratify the Constitution, right? If you all decide to do that together, then his point is that no one's taking your rights from you, so no wrong has been done. And whatever your choice is, you don't have to justify your choice to Locke, but if you choose to give judges, let judges retain certain rights that you choose to give up for yourself, then hey man, it's your choice. Just like you don't have to go to the cops and justify to them, you don't have to argue for your point of view that you feel like driving under the speed limit to the airport with your friend. Hey man, if that's your contract with your buddy, lunch for driving, do it. Okay? Now, you're probably still asking, okay, you've re-emphasized, Professor, that I'm allowed to do that, but why would I want to? Because here's the flip side. If you don't want judges to retain the right to judge, and if you don't want cops, military, and jail wardens to retain the right to punish, and you don't want legislators saying the speed limit's 65 rather than 90, if you don't want them to be able to keep doing that while you've agreed to stop doing it, or haven't agreed to stop doing it, then the government would be violating your rights. Then they would be just like a thief or a murderer in the state of nature. And you are allowed to refuse by any means necessary, including punishing. You're allowed to refuse that situation. Okay? So let's pause here before we go on. I'm going to ask you a question. Okay? Can you, for yourself, think of any reasons why you might want to give up any one of those three major rights that I've outlined? Okay? And if it's hard to attach them to the original rights that Locke states at the very beginning of our reading, just think about what cops, judges, and the legislature do, and then ask yourself, why would I prefer that someone else do that, and also prefer, of course, that I'm not allowed to do it. Only they're allowed to do it. So I'll restate the question. If you have any motivations or reasons for wanting certain people in society, politicians more or less, judges, and police officers and military, to be able to keep doing certain things that we all could do in the state of nature, and also at the same time that you're willing to not do those things yourself. You sort of renounce the throne, right? You renounce certain parts of your rights. Then share that with us now. What reasons might you have for wanting those people to do those things, whereas you don't have to? Okay. So once more, the question is, do you have any reasons where you might voluntarily, completely freely choose to yourself give up or renounce the right that you let others keep doing? Okay? And here's what Locke says. He says, most rational people will recognize that all of those rights are actually a burden to keep entirely to yourself. So let me say something here that I'd like you to write it down because it's important and it's not perfectly clear from what we read in Locke. So let me make this crystal clear. When I said renounce a while ago, that's way too strong of a word. You do not ever wholly, entirely give up any of your natural rights when you join civil society. And think about that. The first 10 amendments of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, are basically all things that insist you keep this right under our government. You keep that right under our government. You will never have this right taken away under our government. Right? And the government might say tax you, but they don't tell you to spend the rest of the money. So you retain plenty of right in civil society. So let me say that a little more directly. When you join a government or civil society, you do not give up entirely any of your rights. So that's me saying what you do not do. Let me now phrase it as what you do. When you join a civil society or government, you retain or keep almost all of your right. Okay, I like to say it's a made-up number, but you'll get the point, is that you give up something like 5% of your freedom and you retain 95% of your freedom. You keep the other 95%. Okay? That you give up the right to punish almost entirely. Okay? And you give up the right to judge to a degree as well. So since they're different, it's a little confusing. My main point is this, is that A, Locke thinks that you consented or freely agreed to all of the rights which you yourself gave up and let others keep. If he's wrong about that, you need to get a new government. And second, that it's not like the government keeps all the rights and you lose them all entirely. It's that you give up just a little bit of your natural right. Like we're talking single-digit percentages of each right. In order, why? What's the reasoning? in order to more securely protect the rights that you have left. So I'll just string all this stuff together. Nobody in the state of nature can make you do anything, right? So long as you are respecting the rights of others, other people can't touch you. They can't come to your house, they can't take your property, they can't do anything. But sometimes we decide that we'd rather let some people keep their rights in our society, and that we're going to sort of pull back. We're not going to use our right entirely. Basically, we transfer it to the other people. Now, so long as A, that's what you've done, you actually chose or agree that that's a good thing to do, then they're allowed to do it. B, you also retain most of your right. You only gave up 3, 5, whatever % of the rights. You keep the rest of the rights. Same thing, cops can use guns, you can't, but the Second Amendment says, well, you can still have lots of guns. You just can't have, anti-aircraft missiles like the military can. You see what I mean? In the state of nature, if you wanted, you could have anti-aircraft missiles, so long as you didn't point them at citizens, right? So you let the government keep having that right, and you pull back from it. You say, hey, it's not for me anymore. Okay, and sorry, I really need to restate this final point that ties it all together. Why on earth would you want to do that? So Locke says, if you wanted to, it's legitimate. If you didn't want to, it's wrong. Why on earth might you want to do that according to Locke? The main point for Locke is that the right to punish is a right that most of us would like to see executed by somebody else. Remember, this is part of why I dwell on killing the thief. Remember that you are allowed to punish the thief in the state of nature up to the point of killing them. Does that sound like something you want to do? I'm not asking, of course, whether you think it's right or wrong. I'm saying, is that something you would like to be the person who does that? You're Dog the Bounty Hunter or whatever, and every time someone's rights are violated, you go and you hunt them down. Okay, here's the thing. I don't want to do that. You all haven't seen me too much. I'm not a huge guy, right? So I'm not going to go and track down like the mafioso who has brass knuckles and knives and things. I'm not going to track down some mobster who flees to, say, Budapest in Hungary, right? And handcuff him and bring him back to the United States to face my punishment. I say this seriously, but also kidding a little bit. I'm scared. I'm not doing that. So one of the major reasons, to me it's the most clear cut, that we agree to join the state of nature is that you have the right to protect yourself in the state of nature. You can kill the thief as they come up to you as long as they're really trying to rob you. You also have the right to punish people after the fact. I don't want to do that. I don't want to flip the switch myself personally on the electric chair, even if someone deserves to die. I'll have nightmares. I don't want to fly to some foreign country to bring someone back to face justice. I'm not strong enough, blah, 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 whatever you want to add here. Now, some people are willing and good at doing that. We make them go to police academy to make sure they're good, but some people are willing to do that dangerous job. That's how civil society works. Some people we determine are good and willing to do certain jobs. Some people are willing to keep criminals at their place of business. They're called jail wardens. They're called corrections officers. Rick Ross, the rapper, used to be one, believe it or not. Now, I don't want to do that because I'm not built like Rick Ross. But Rick Ross is built like Rick Ross. He's a big, big fat guy, basically. Okay? So I say, I don't want to do that. I'll make sure the person who wants to do it, who's best at the job, I'll vote them in or otherwise allow them to do it. Okay? You see how dangerous, scary, distasteful, and unsuccessful it would be for me or most of you to be the one who does the punishing of the criminal? Okay. Now, we can apply that to the other branches of government, but it tends to be a little less clear. But let me show you how it's applied. Okay. In America, just as John Locke recommended, and the founding fathers thought he was pretty smart, and so they copied him, okay, or they learned from him. He says there's 3 branches of government. You'll need to write these down. There's the judicial, there's the executive, and there's the legislative. Now, some of you learned this in high school. I think we're all supposed to, but I'll be honest, I missed it in high school, so this is super important if it's new information to you. There's the judicial, the executive, and the legislative. So the executive are the ones who execute punishment. That's the easiest way to remember it. And they don't only execute criminals, but you can use that to sort of tie it in if you want. Right? It's the jail warden who executes the murderer. It is the military who executes those who are threats to our rights. And it's the police officer who executes punishment by taking you to jail. Okay? So they're the ones who literally punish. That's what the executive branch does. So theirs is the violent job. That's another way you can think about it. Is executive sounds pretty innocent. But they do all the violent jobs. Now, I know a lot of you know that technically the president is the head of the executive branch. That seems a little weird since the president isn't out there like busting criminals. But they are in charge of those sort of decisions. Okay? And so just think of the president as the head of the military, which the president is, and, that will keep it straight for you. Now, here's a place where people totally mess up on all the time trying to do Locke. They think of judges as punishing. So next to judiciary in your notes, write, judges do not punish. Think about it. Executive punishment is violent. Have you ever seen a judge lay hands on a defendant? No. When they say, you, ma'am, or sir, have been pronounced guilty, they don't grab the person and drag them to jail. They sit up there in their fancy robes and don't touch them at all. So what does the judge do? I'm not trying to talk down to you when I say this, but the judge judges. Okay? The judge, the judiciary branch of government, judges. So what do they judge? They choose what the proper punishment is. Okay, they don't execute the punishment. They don't do the punishing. They look at the law, how bad your infraction was, and say, this one deserves 3 months. That one deserves 6 months for the same crime. So they decide on how to apply the law. Okay, that's the way to think about it. Now, you might say, oh, I'd like to retain that right. Why did I give it up to the cops? Or, sorry, to the judges? 2 things. You do retain the right to judge to a degree. That's called jury duty. So if you ever try to get out of jury duty, when you're called up for it, you're actually trying to avoid keeping your right. So remember that next time you try to get out of jury duty. So that's part of the right to judge that you retain as a citizen. Second, think about this. This is something Locke says in our reading. He says, anytime there's a crime and a victim of the crime, the 2 parties involved, the criminal and the person violated, the victim, they're not going to see eye to eye on the punishment, right? Even if the criminal says, yes, I did it, and yes, I should be punished. Big ifs, I know. But even if they did that, the criminal would probably say, the fair application of the law is I have to pay a $50 fine. And the victim will say, I think a fair punishment of the law here, or a fair sentence, a fair application of the law is 30 lashes with a cat of 9 tails torture device or something. So in the state of nature, or another way to put this, if we didn't have government considered as judges, then every time there's someone who needs to be punished, the victim wants to go too far in the punishment, and the criminal doesn't want to go far enough. So they both have an interest in applying the wrong punishment. That's why Locke says the good of judges, why you want judges to retain most of the natural right of applying the law correctly, is because they are what he calls disinterested or unbiased judges. The victim, even though they have, justice and right on their side, is going to over exaggerate how bad it was and over punish as a consequence, or call for an over punishment. The victim of the criminal, of course, is going to say, "Oh, it wasn't so bad. I should get like 3 days in jail. That's it." They're both biased, or what Locke calls interested, like they have an interest in their own well-being and not that of the other people. So the judge just comes in as a third party, as someone who's neutral, who wants only to apply the law correctly. They don't want to score points with the criminal or score points with the victim. All they care about is applying the law fairly. So here's the thing: the benefit of civil society, considered as that you let the judges keep their natural right of judging and you mostly give it up, is that you know that the judge is more likely to come to a fair verdict. That you as the victim are going to over-exaggerate and the criminal is going to understate how wrong it was. Okay? Now, why Locke likes the Congress, basically, the legislature, is it's not quite so clearly stated. But imagine this: if every time we wanted to decide as a community what we should do, if we all decided hey, it's the 21st century, we're gonna have driverless cars here pretty soon, maybe we should change the laws about driving on the roads. And then we had to call up all 300 plus million Americans to decide on that. It would never work, right? Okay, so that's one justification, is that in a democracy, if you don't allow some to vote, the Congress, it's called representative democracy. If you don't allow some to retain their right of choosing how to use our freedom and give up some of that right yourself, then how you can't call 300 million people to work, to vote on something every time. What about the person who works the night shift? You call it during the middle of the day, they're asleep during the middle of the day because they work at night. Right? You see what I'm saying? It would be totally unworkable. All right? Another point about representative democracy is in theory, Congress, that is the legislative branch, the legislature, the ones who write the laws, since you get a pick, which is the way you retain your right, some of your right on what the law should be, is you pick the people, pick the laws. They represent your voice. Is that they're supposed to be the people you think will do the best job. They're supposed to be the smartest, and they're supposed to be the best people. Now, don't get me started. I know that you probably don't love your senators or state legislature and all that, but okay, that's at least your fault if you don't like them, because you could vote them out and vote new people in if you wanted. Okay, so again, even for the legislature, you choose who goes in there. That's called consent, remember? You're supposed to choose who you most want in there. Ideally, that'd be the smartest and best people. Okay, so then you have someone who's better than average. You see? Someone better than average choosing what laws there should be. Pick this is sort of me, pick the dumbest person you know who's over 18 and think they're a citizen, right? If we kept all of our perfect right to vote that we individually voted on every single law, they'd get to vote on every single law. But what we do instead is we pick someone we think is a better person and smarter than the dumbest, meanest person you know, and we hope that they'll do a better job even than we would, but that they'll definitely do a better job than that mean, stupid person who's your neighbor or whatever. Okay, you see how that's supposed to work? The three branches? Okay. Definitely email me if you have any questions about that, because some people have taken great political science classes, and the version I just gave is the tip of the iceberg of what they know. Some people, though, and this was me in college, that's all new. You know, we probably all heard executive, legislature, and judiciary, but honestly, I'm telling you all the truth. I didn't really know what those meant until I started reading stuff like this. So if you have any questions, etc., absolutely email me. Okay? So a few things. First, I want to restate in slightly different words something I've said before. When you join civil society, that is, it means the same thing. When you join a government, it has to happen through your free consent. I can't force you to become a part of, German or French society. Okay? They can't force you and I can't force you. Second, what happens when you do choose to join a society is you always give up some small portion of the rights that you already have. Then you pick others, this is political inequality, which I know sounds bad. You pick others and you say they get to keep those rights. Right? The president gets to keep the right of flying on this airplane that we happen to call Air Force One. I'm going to give that right up. The cops get to have guns in public places where some other people don't. I'm going to give that right up. Okay? So you choose to diminish or limit your right a little bit. Now, if you never choose to do that, it's tyranny, it's injustice, it's very, very bad. But if you choose to, it's acceptable. Now, why would you ever choose to? And this is me rephrasing the point a little bit. Because you are confident that you giving up 3 to 5% of your right will enhance the rights that you have left. It will best protect the rights which you have left. So government is supposed to be those who are the best at the jobs you've given them. The punishing job, the fair application job, and the determining new laws, usually that's the legislature. So think about it. Final example to sort of bring it home. If in the state of nature, you can have property and whatnot in the state of nature and there's other people around. So think about it. It's your family in the state of nature and you build cabinets, say, like wooden cabinets. Okay? And someone comes along in the middle of the night and steals your wooden cabinets. Now that's wrong and that's a violation of your natural human rights. So they weren't supposed to, but look, realistically it'll happen. What do you think is, who do you think is more likely to prevent theft? You in the state of nature where it's just you and your family and yeah, you can have guns and stuff, but you'll probably be asleep at night, right? So who's more likely to prevent theft from happening in the first place? You when you're asleep in the state of nature or cops who are up 24 hours a day? I think the cops are more likely to prevent crime. Okay? Second point related to it, who do you think is more effective at punishing crime? You, who maybe like me are a little bit, I'm a little too scared to like bust heads every time there's been a crime. Or a cop who's been trained for that, who's maybe someone who's more willing to do those physical acts than you or me are, you or I are. Okay? Same thing. Do you want some random American voting on every single law? No, ideally you'd have someone who's the smartest and the morally best person in the legislature, and you have, maybe 100 of those in the Senate. Not maybe, we have 100 of those in the Senate, and if they were better morally and intellectually than the rest of us, we'd have awesome laws, right? So again, you give up a small portion of each one of your rights and retain or keep the bulk, the vast majority of your right. Why you would want to do that is because if you give up 5% of each right, we'd say, the 95% you have left is way better protected, is way more effective, and way more likely to be respected by others when you live under a government than when you live in the state of nature. So even though you have rights in the state of nature, they are highly vulnerable. Okay, you have rights in the state of nature. People are not supposed to steal your stuff, but they will. It's a lot less likely that you'll be robbed when you live in a government. Okay? So, that's That's the recording here. Okay. We're going to tackle something in the next time you listen to a recording, which was in the reading, the second chunk of the reading, and that's about property rights. But we're going to deal with that in the next one. We keep it separate. Give you a whole chunk on property rights in Locke, and that goes on to set up these more detailed questions that we have about property right in the contemporary modern age. Okay? All right. So thank you, everyone. We'll do a little bit more Locke and then move on to other issues. Thank you.